Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Thursday, May 27th. We're breaking down both slates that we have over on DraftKings today. Unfortunately, on Thursdays, we always get these split slate days, which makes things a little bit more confusing, but we're going to be breaking them both down. And if you guys do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. If you want to follow me over on social media, you're able to find me in the bottom right corner of your screen. And if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. And since the end of the month, if you do sign up, as long as you follow up the next month, you can get a refund for this month, so you don't get double charged and get this last week free. With this projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff, link is down below. But I think that's it for the plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. All right, and as per usual, we're going to start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And to be honest, the bats are so bad for the early slate. When I go over to the bats, it's only going to be guys from the late slate. But if you guys want to know some stacks I like for the early slate, I'm thinking the Indians righties make some pretty good plays here. Owen Miller, as long as he's in the lineup, Cesar Hernandez, Jose Ramirez, Jordan Luplow. Those guys do grade out pretty well for me in the early slate. I know Matt Boyd's not a terrible pitcher, but versus righties, he's getting a bit lucky this season. Do we want to head over to his numbers? I didn't put him on here because I obviously don't really like Matthew Boyd too much today, but if you're looking at his splits versus righties this season, you know, 40 inning sample size, he's got a really good 2.68 ERA, but he's getting really lucky considering his xFIP's at 5.22, 19% K versus them, and nearly a 50% fly ball rate. Not really giving up too much homers or hard contact, but there's some righties in this lineup that I think can give him some trouble. I forgot to even mention Ahmed Rosario, who's been hitting near the top of the order recently. I know Pennell Reyes is out, which kind of hurts the overall lineup, but I think we can definitely use some of the Indians righties on that early slate. I also think some of the Cubs righties versus Tyler Anderson would make some sense in the righty on lefty matchup. Plus, the Cubs this season versus lefties have actually been pretty solid in the power department. Looking at their overall splits, they're striking out quite a bit, but they have a near 185, right? Well, not near. They do have a 185 ISO, 111 WRC plus, 335 WOBA, and a 332 on base percentage. So I know the strikeouts are there, but I mean, they got some decent splits versus lefties. So if I'm looking at anybody on the early slate for bats, I am liking those Cubs righties and the Indians righties. Yeah, there's a couple other bats you can look at, but those are the ones that stand out to me right now. I just wanted to mention that because I don't have any individual bats listed on the hitting side of things because they're just so bad overall. I don't want to waste any spots because the late slate's got plenty of good bats to talk about, so I wanted to save it for that. But anyway, we'll get back to the pitchers here, and we have the ace of the slate. He's playing on the early slate here. Shane Bieber, $10,800 in a really good matchup versus Detroit. We saw Aaron Savali have a pretty good game versus them 2 nights ago, and then Tristan McKenzie, a guy that's been kind of getting hit up recently, just got recalled from AAA because Zach Plesac, I think, injured his thumb taking his shirt off or something like that. He came up through, I think, 5 scoreless innings, if I remember correctly, and the Indians only gave up 1 run in that game, I think, which I want to say they lost 0-1. Don't remember exactly, but either way, the Detroit offense, we know we can pick on them with either lefties or righties. They've been worse versus lefties this season, but they still haven't been very good versus righties, and now you have one of the best right-handed pitchers in all of baseball, Shane Bieber, going to the mound here, and it feels like he's having a down season, and that's pretty good when I feel like he's got a down season. He still has a 2.7 xFIP with a 35.5% K rate. The walks have been there. It's just, I don't know, he hasn't felt as quite Shane Bieberish as he was last year in that short season, but he's still been fantastic, 106 pitches per game, so you don't have to worry about a short lease for Shane Bieber. He's one of those guys that goes deep into the game almost each and every single time he's on the mound. And really get the Tigers splits this season versus right-handed pitching. Like I said, they've been a bit better versus lefties, but these numbers are still pretty bad versus righties. Over a 27% K rate, 91 WRC plus, about 300 WOBA on base percentage, and only a 150 ISO. So yeah, if you're playing the early slate, which I know it's not the greatest slate in the world, I really prefer the late slate, but Shane Bieber is definitely a guy you're going to want to get in your lineup. Only a 3 implied team total against him, pretty heavy favorite. And a 7.5 K prop as well. And Detroit's a pretty good place to pitch. So absolutely love Shane Bieber, and I'd have a hard time not playing him on that early slate. If you're not playing Shane Bieber, you could go to Marcus Stroman here at $9,900. It's just he is really expensive, especially for a guy that doesn't really strike out many guys. You know, the matchup versus Colorado is awesome, and he gets a ton of ground balls. That's one of the main appeals for Marcus Stroman, is that he's not going to usually get blown up because he gets so many ground balls. Like on the season versus lefties, I think he's got 60% ground ball rate, and then versus righties, it gets actually a little bit lower at 47.5. But I mean, over the course of his career, he's been a big ground ball guy. Not a guy that strikes out a ton of guys, but versus the Rockies, I would not be surprised if he has one of his higher strikeout days. I think he's coming off an 8 strikeout day. I forget exactly who that was against, but I think he should be a solid play here versus the Rockies away from Coors Field because they have been absolutely a putrid offense this season. And looking at their numbers versus righties, WRC plus takes into account for park conditions and things like that, park factors, and they only have a 69 WRC plus. Some of these numbers look better because of course field, but that WRC plus is like the main factor here, 69, which is absolutely terrible. So I think if you want to fade Shane Bieber just to get away from high ownership, you could go to Marcus Stroman because there should be some strikeout upside here versus the Rockies, but I would really have a hard time paying nearly $10,000 for Marcus Stroman instead of just paying the extra couple bucks for Shane Bieber, getting a guy that could easily go 7+ innings, strike out 15 bats, and pick up a win as well. Because that Mets offense is pretty brutal. I do think the Indians lineup is actually going to be one of the better stacks on that early slate. I know if they were in the late slate, I really wouldn't have much interest in the Indians, but there's very few viable bats, it looks like, on the early slate as of right now. Then going down to a couple pitchers in the late slate, actually 3 in a row here. So we have Steven Strasburg, Chris Bassett, and Shohei Ohtani. Then we have another one in Alex Wood, who's our least expensive pitcher that we're going to talk about. But just a bunch of mid-range guys here, not really liking any of the top-level pitchers. I think Sonny Gray's on the late slate, but wasn't overly in love with him versus the Nationals. But Steven Strasburg here kind of struggled with control, and his fastball velocity still wasn't great. It was kind of sitting in the lower 90s in his last start, but he still had a pretty decent day. He only has 15 innings this year, so I hate to put too much into it, but a 4.11 ERA, 5.24 xFIP, and a 5.43 SIERA. These numbers do not make me feel very confident. Now, the matchup versus the Cincinnati Reds also isn't the greatest thing in the world because they have guys like Tyler Naquin, Jesse Winker that can hit right-handed pitching very, very well, but Steven Strasburg did throw on 70 pitches in his last start, assuming we could probably get that closer to upper 80s to low 90s in this start. As long as he doesn't get blown up, I think $8,500 is a fair price tag for him, and only a 3.73 implied team total against him. He is a slight favorite, 6.5K prop as well. Am I super confident in Steven Strasburg here? No. Do I like the price tag? Yes. Is he going to absolutely wow us today with 10+ strikeouts? Probably not, but the way the pitchers on the late slate, I think Steven Strasburg does great as one of the better options, even though I'm not overly confident in it. Chris Bassett, $8,300. He's actually having a really good season. He just keeps putting up really strong games, and $8,300 I think is a fair price tag for him. I don't typically like using pitchers versus the Angels, but with Mike Trout out of the lineup, it does make you feel a little bit better considering he's the best player in baseball. You still have to go against Ohtani, Rendon. I know Justin Upton's been solid this year, so is Jared Walsh, but when you take Trout out of the lineup, it does make things a little bit softer. And like I said, Bassett's been okay this year. 3.55 SIERA, 3.64 xFIP, 3.69 SIERA, nice 25.7% K rate. Not really walking guys whatsoever. And I know if you're looking at the matchup versus the Angels, you got to keep in mind a lot of these numbers are with Mike Trout in the lineup, but it doesn't look very good. But they're only walking 6% of the time and near 25% K rate. The other numbers are okay, but again, take Mike Trout out of the lineup and things get a bit easier. So I think Chris Bassett, $8,300 is a fine option on that late slate. Shohei Ohtani, $7,700. It's the same old story with him every single time he's on the mound. I usually always put him on here because the guy's just a freak of nature, and I feel like he always deserves to be put on here just because of his upside, but the walks are an issue. He's got around a 20% walk rate, which absolutely sucks, but he does have that really nice 35% K rate, about 96 on his fastball. He can reach close to 100, if not 100 some nights. 2.37 ERA, 3.56 xFIP, 4.13 SIERA. It's just, he can't keep walking guys like this and getting away with it. It's been working this season. It's just at some point he's going to get in trouble and get absolutely blown up. But he just has great stuff. I mean, over 13 Ks per 9, but over 6 Ks per 9, which is the bad thing. Only a 152 batting average given up, and a 52.5% ground ball rate. So the underlying numbers are solid. It's just the one big issue with Shohei Ohtani is that walk rate, because when you after a pitcher that just keeps walking guys, it's definitely an absolute headache, and it's a very stressful evening. So if you don't want stress, you're probably not going to want to roster Shohei Ohtani. But if you're looking for upside and you can handle that stress, Shohei Ohtani definitely is appeal for that. And he gets a nice park upgrade going to Oakland. It's definitely a pitcher's park there. So if you want to use Ohtani, try to hunt that strikeout upside, you can certainly do so. Just keep in mind the walks are going to be an issue. Although they've gotten a little bit better considering they were close to around 30-some% earlier in the season. We had a really small sample size, and it's still a small sample size, only 30 innings here, but it's getting below 20%, so maybe if we can start creeping down to 10%, we'd feel better about that, but I definitely do like that strikeout upside. And then Kyle Hendricks, $7,200. I think he's going to be a pretty popular SP2 in the early slate, unless you happen to double spend up for a pitcher. You could always go with Shane Bieber, Marcus Stroman. You could also look at Pablo Lopez as well, but if you just want to try to make a nice balanced lineup, Kyle Hendricks versus Pittsburgh, I think is going to be the way most people go. It's a pitcher's park in Pittsburgh, less than a 3.5 team total against him. He's a slight favorite, 5K prop as well. Now, the guy only throws around 87 miles per hour, so he's never going to wow you. He's not going to have a big strikeout usually game. I mean, he's got less than a 20% carry. Just doesn't really walk many guys, so you're kind of just hoping he gets there on finesse for the most part and strong control and just gets a lot of ground balls, which is certainly possible here versus Pittsburgh. And Hendricks has had a weird season where he's had some really bad games and he's had some really good games mixed in there, but Pittsburgh is definitely one of the best matchups you can ask for from your pitcher. They're not really striking out a ton, which Cal Hendricks doesn't really strike out many bats, so I'm not assuming it's going to be a big strikeout game, but just from a run prevention standpoint, this should be a solid game for Hendricks because Pittsburgh has had virtually no power at all versus righties this year, only a 108 ISO, which I think might be the lowest of all teams. I'd have to double check that, but that's the lowest I've seen personally versus righties. I think the Tigers versus lefties is like at .066, which is absolutely terrible, but this is a really good number here for Cal Hendricks, only 289 WOBA, but 82 WRC plus, so just from a matchup standpoint, I think Cal Hendricks makes sense, like that price tag as well. Then Alex Wood here, $6,900 versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. Hate using any pitchers versus the Dodgers. I don't think I've used a pitcher yet versus them, but they're missing a couple bats here. And Alex Wood's been pretty solid this year. 1.93 ERA, 2.85 xFIP, 3.21 SIERA. I think I used the wrong word. I don't think solid is the right word. I think very good's probably the better word for it. Now, the ERA is not going to sit below 2 all season, but the guy's been good. 25.5% K rate, doesn't really walk too many guys. Close to a 60% ground ball rate. And if you're going to use anybody versus Dodgers, I would prefer using the lefties instead of the righties because they obviously crush right-handed pitching. But versus lefties this year, they're still good, obviously, but it's not as good as it is versus righties. Like a 25.2% K rate. They're walking a lot, but not a ton of power. The WOBA, it's below 300, 89 WRC plus. Now versus righties, it's another story. We're going to see just dark red bars here. You do not want to use righties versus the Dodgers. But versus lefties, you can kind of get away with it if it's the right pitcher, and at only $6,900. And how well Alex Wood's been pitching this year, he's already faced the Dodgers too, and he's been fine. So I think if you're looking for a dirt cheap option on the late slate, Alex Wood does make some sense, even though it's a very scary thing trying to roster pitchers versus the Dodgers. But with that being said, guys, I think that's it for the pitchers. I think we can move right on to the bats. And as per usual, we'll start with the catcher position. We're on the diamond, hit the outfield as well. And like I said earlier, I do not have any early slate bats listed here. I went over my early slate bats that I like earlier. I like the Indians righties, like the Cubs righties, and there's obviously a couple of other options you could look at, but it is a very gross slate for the bats. If you want to rewind the video, if you happen to skip that, you can check out my thoughts there. But all these guys are from the 7 p.m. and later slate. And we'll start up top with Yermin Mercedes, $5,200. You are going to see a lot of White Sox players here because they are by far the best stacking option in my opinion. Obviously, there's some other good stacks, but I like the White Sox a ton here. They grade out very well versus left-handed pitching. Like, you never want to use lefties versus the White Sox because they're just one of those teams that absolutely crushes left-handed pitching. And we have Bruce Zimmerman on the mound for the Orioles, and I always like using teams versus the Orioles because the pitching staff's really not that good outside of John Means, and the bullpen's not that great either. Now, if this was in Camden Yards, I'm already all about the White Sox here, but I'm sure they'd have a team total close to 6. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but still not bad hitting in Chicago, and they have a 5.38 implied team total. Wouldn't be super surprised if that just rises throughout the day. But Mercedes versus lefties this season, absolutely crushing them. Only a 7.5% K rate, 450 batting average, 212 WRC plus, over a 200 ISO. Yeah, I definitely like Yermin Mercedes here. Now, he's super expensive, but the way he's been playing this year, I definitely think it's deserved. And if you're looking at Bruce Zimmerman's splits this season, about 5.5 ERA, 4.68 xFIP, 4.66 SIERA, 17% K rate, only 7 Ks per 9. Only a 38% ground ball rate, 31% hard contact rate, and over 2 homers per 9. So, is he the worst pitcher in major leagues? No, but he's not very good either, and you can definitely sign me up for all these White Sox. Yasmani Grandal, $4,400. He hasn't been quite as good as Mercedes in the batting average department, but he does have a 205 ISO this season with a 119 WRC plus, and he can hit both lefties or righties fine. So I do like Grandal. If you can't find the extra, $800 for Mercedes, I think he is a totally fine option. Then Yadier Molina, $4,100. Do like the Cardinals quite a bit versus Seth Frankoff. If you're not going White Sox today, the Cardinals are my second favorite stack. They have a team total close to 5 here. I like hitting in Arizona, and Frankoff is just not a very good pitcher, not one that you should fear. Looking at his splits this season, he's got a 7.27 ERA, 5.27 xFIP, 5.5 SIERA, 14% K with a 12% walk rate, also allowing a 4.27 WOBA and a 2.67 ISO. So I like all the Cardinals here quite a bit, and you get those guaranteed 9th inning at bats on the road as well. Dropping out of first base, Jose Abreu, $5,300. Super expensive, but we know he can crush left-handed pitching. over a 200 ISO this season with a 350 WOBA and a 126 WRC plus, and those numbers get even better specifically versus lefties. So I love Jose Abreu. Paul Goldschmidt, 4,100 bucks, very cheap. I do like him here versus Seth Frankoff. Just got done talking about him, but pretty much it's going to be the same thing this entire sheet here. I'm going to say I like all the bats versus Zimmerman. I'm going to like all the bats versus Seth Frankoff. These are the two obvious stacks in my opinion, but they grade out just very, very well for me. So I do like Paul Goldschmidt, even though he's not having a great year, only a 161 ISO and a 253 batting average, but it doesn't really matter to me when you're facing a pitcher with over a 7 ERA this year. And then Andrew Vaughn, 2,500 bucks, just cheap righty power here versus Bruce Zimmerman. You can also play him in the outfield, but at only 2,500 bucks, I'd imagine he'd be one of the more popular plays in the entire slate, especially since he's on the best stack of the slate. And then dropping down to second base, he's also eligible at shortstop. We have Tommy Edman, 4,800 bucks, should be leading off here. He's fine versus either righties or lefties, but it's still a fine option. You're betting close to 280. ISO is below 100, so he hasn't really shown a ton of power this year, but if you are stacking the Cardinals, it's going to be hard to leave off the guy that's leading off for them. Nick Madrigal, 3,300 bucks. I'd prefer if he was batting near the top of the order. Sometimes when he's facing a lefty, we see him like in the 2 hole. If that would be the case, 3,300 bucks would be a really hard fade for me. If he's batting 9th, obviously it doesn't feel very comfortable, especially in cash games. But I do like all the White Sox today, and you can certainly play him. He doesn't really have much power, but he is batting close to 300 this season, and that's not bad for a guy that's in the low 3s. And then Matt Carpenter, 2,800 bucks. I mean, he's been absolutely abysmal this year. Only a 119 batting average with a 51 WRC plus. I'd be interested to see what that strikeout rate is. Pretty sure it's close to 30.9% K rate. It does have a nice 50% fly ball rate and a 43.8% hard contact rate. That's pretty good. It's kind of all or nothing with this guy, but I think there's some decent home run upside here versus Seth Frankoff, and he's dirt cheap, so I don't hate Matt Carpenter, but I don't love it either. I do like that hard contact rate that he has this season, though. Going to third base, Nolan Arenado, really expensive, 5,700 bucks, but he's been playing well, batting close to 300 this year with a 257 ISO, 142 WRC plus, close to a 900 OPS, and like I said, give me all the Cardinals versus Seth Frankoff. Eduardo Escobar, 5,100 bucks. I'm pretty sure this is the first bat that we've talked about that isn't a Cardinals or White Sox, and I think the Diamondbacks stack, if you're looking to get contrarian on this slate, because those guys are going to be very, very chalky, the Diamondbacks versus Carlos Martinez, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. If you're looking at his splits this season, Martinez hasn't been bad. He has a 4.18 ERA, but he's getting a bit lucky considering his xFIP's above 5, so is his Sierra, and only a 12% K rate, about 4 Ks per 9, and a 7.5% walk rate. Now, he's not giving up much power, but this guy's still not amazing, and I think we could definitely pick on him a little bit. So if you're looking to get contrarian on this slate, I think the Diamondbacks are a decent way to do it. And I think the Rangers are as well, which I'll talk about them in a little bit. But don't hate Escobar. He's actually shown some decent power this year with a 250 ISO. Then Yoan Moncada, $5,000. I think third base is a really good position to spend up on because I'm not really liking the value I'm seeing unless something pops up where we have a guy that's pretty cheap that ends up batting in like the top half of the order. But as of right now, I'm not really seeing anything. I prefer Moncada versus right-handed pitching, but I don't think Bruce Zimmerman's going to last long here for the Orioles, so he should see a righty at some point. And either way, he's just part of that White Sox stack, and he's the cheapest third baseman that I'm going to be talking about here. Then shortstop, you have Tim Anderson, $5,500. Not really showing a ton of power this season, but he's just doing his typical Tim Anderson thing where he bats around 300, and I would take that. There is still some power upside here, and he's obviously going to be a guy who gets on base quite a bit, so I do like Tim Anderson leading off for the best stack on the slate. Then Amundo Sosa, $3,200. It's a very small sample size, but he's actually been playing some pretty good baseball this year. It's around 30-40 plate appearances, but a 370 batting average with over a 430 WOBA and a 177 WRC plus with a 500 on base percentage. Are those numbers going to keep up throughout the season? Obviously not, but I do like all the Cardinals here, and he's pretty darn cheap if you can't afford Tim Anderson. Then Nick Ahmed, $30,000. I already talked about it with Eduardo Escobar, but I think the Diamondbacks are a decent way to get contrarian on this slate. Ahmed's numbers this season have been awful, but if you are stacking the Diamondbacks, I think he's at a position where if you need some value, Ahmed's not terrible. Then drop him to the outfield. There is no expensive outfielders I like, which is a good thing considering I really like expensive third basemen, shortstops, and first basemen today. So I think roster construction should work out. I also like some expensive catchers, so it should work out where we can actually play some cheap outfielders and not feel like we're missing anything out on the expensive side because we can always play Andrew Vaughn here as well, only $2,500. I imagine he'll be pretty popular. But Adam Eaton, if you are stacking the White Sox, I feel like a lot of people are going to leave him off their lineups considering he's batting he's a lefty on lefty, and people hate using lefties versus lefties. But if you think the White Sox are going to smash Zimmerman, he's probably not going to last more than a couple innings, and he'll see a righty at some point. And the Orioles bullpen's not that great, so Eaton, I think he makes sense. Now, typically, I'd say he's a guy that can get on base quite a bit and doesn't have much power, but he's only batting .208 this year with a .313 on base percentage, but he does have a .160 ISO, which actually isn't too bad. So I don't hate Adam Eaton in full stacks. Probably not going to get there in cash games, considering he's only $5,000. David Peralta versus Carlos Martinez, just kind of that contrarian Diamondback stack that I'm talking about. Just a nice lefty on righty matchup here, and he's got a 190 ISO this year with close to a 275 batting average. And then after that, we have 3 Texas Rangers bats in a row. Chris Flexen's not a terrible pitcher, but he's not a guy that has a real high strikeout rate. I think it's sitting in the, I want to say close to 15% this year. I have to double check that. Yeah, 13.5%, even worse than I thought. I thought it was around 15, so even worse, and only a 5% walk rate. So he's going to give you pitches to hit. He's giving up a 327 batting average this year. Not giving up a ton of power, but I think we can definitely use some of these Rangers here versus Chris Flexen. Typically, I pick on the Rangers, and they have a 4.25 implied team total here, but these guys got some power upside. Joey Gallo, I know it really hasn't been there this year. He's only batting .205, which I guess isn't out of the ordinary for Joey Gallo, but only a 154 ISO. You know, he's going to strike out quite a bit, but there's definitely some home run upside here for Gallo. Adolis, I think it's Adolis Garcia, $3,600. I think he's got 16 homers this year. He's been absolutely insane. I'm not sure where he come from. I think everyone's a little bit surprised about this, but it looks like it's real. I don't think it's a fluke, and the guy's been awesome. 322 ISO, 400 WOBA, close to 300 batting average, 616 slugging. Does strike out quite a bit, doesn't really walk much, but I mean, the dongers have been there. 43% hard contact rate with only a 5% soft contact rate, which I think is the lowest, only behind Yasmani Grandal here overall. So yeah, Adolis Garcia, the price tag is just, it keeps being low because he's on the Rangers, but the guy's been awesome this year. I think they're a decent contrarian stack today. Don't think a lot of people are going to go with them, considering their team total is just low at 4.25. Then Chris Davis is free, $2,000. Now he's free for a reason because he sucks so far this year. 31 plate appearances, 39 WRC plus, 107 ISO, 222 WOBA, and a batting average below 180. These numbers are absolutely terrible, but he's $2,000. If you are stacking the Rangers and you need a free play, Chris Davis is there and he doesn't hit ninth, which I guess is one positive for him, but it's still not pretty. But I don't hate it at the freebie price tag. But with that being said, guys, I think that's going to be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. You can follow me over on social media. You can see the bottom right corner of your screen. If you want help with the channel, over on Patreon, link is down below for that. But I'm going to stop rambling, and I wish you guys the best of luck today, and hope the weather is wonderful wherever you are, and enjoy your Thursday.